Greetings aspirants, welcome to Narayan IAS. In this session of Daily News Analysis, we have picked up certain important articles from Hindu as well as Indian Express. Before moving into the session, I would like to thank one and all for watching these videos and encouraging us. As you are liking it, we want you to continue this support and do like, comment and share these videos. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Narayana IAS. We'll delve into the articles. Let us look at what are those articles that we have picked up for this current session. The first article is from the Indian Express, which is published in page number 1. It is referring to the India's growth story, and it is saying that Indian economy will touch $5 trillion in 3 years. We will look into the possibilities and challenges which exist for this particular growth story that they are projecting. The second article is again from Indian Express, published in page number 8. This is referring to a particular discussion that has happened by the Taliban Minister with some of the regional powers that it has in and around Afghanistan, and this is significant from the fact that Afghanistan is generally considered as heart of Asia. The third article is again from the Indian Express, where it is talking about this quota gambit in the context of the agitation that is happening and the consequent promise that the government has made to implement the quota for Maratha community. This has appeared in page number 10. The fourth article is again from the Indian Express, where it is talking about why some nations have stopped UNRWA funding. This has published in page number 13. And the final and fifth article is from the Hindu, which is titled, "What is Humboldt Enigma and what does it mean for India?" This has published in the last page of the Hindu newspaper, that is of Delhi edition. We look into the first article. This article, as we have already seen, is talking about the India's growth story, where it is saying that the GDP to grow at 7% plus and it might touch $5 trillion in 3 years. This topic is significant from the growth and development perspective and what are those various challenges that it is facing. Look at this previous year question. There was this mains question in 2018. The nature of the economic growth in India in recent times is often described as a jobless growth. Do you agree with this view? Give your arguments in favor of your answer. Look at the context. Remember that before introducing the interim budget, just days before that, the government of India has come up with this particular report. It is referred to as the Indian Economy, a Review. And this has been published by the Department of Economic Affairs under Ministry of Finance. It says that Indian economy had been progressing for the past decade more rapidly in comparison with whatever the growth and development that has happened from the times of independence to this year of 2014. Second, after talking about the progress of Indian economy in this particular decade, where this has been rapid and this has been very progressive according to its claim, it is also talking about what are the possible future prospects that Indian economy has through this particular report. We should look into the details. As a key pointer, this report is saying that this growth rate of India will be either at 7% or above that in this particular financial year. And second, it is trying to convey this particular pointer by comparing it with the sluggish growth rate that the globe is experiencing. That is roughly around 2%. This is where it is keeping the Indian economy as the brightest spot in the current scenario of the global economy. Second, it also says that given this particular fact and also given the fact that Indian economy would also grow again either at this rate of 7% or above that, the possibility of achieving the status of $5 trillion size for Indian economy in terms of GDP is possible within a time period of 3 years. It is this particular pointer which makes this particular report significant. And we will now look into whether the possibilities of this particular pointer are there, and if there are possibilities, what are the other challenges that it has, as it has been reported in the same report. Look at these particular measures that it says, where because of these measures, Indian economy is standing resilient amidst the sluggish global growth rate that the global economy is witnessing. The first such supply side measure that it talks about alongside various demand side measures is this. It says there have been significant reforms that the government has implemented on the supply side factors. For example, out of many, it was quoting these two, fiscal side reforms and the financial side reforms. For example, with respect to fiscal side reforms, it was saying that this article, the implementation of 101 constitutional amendment which brought into force the goods and services tax had been far-reaching according to this report. This is far-reaching because apart from removing these problematic scenarios of cascading effect which acts as hindrances to the production firms, on the other hand, this has also brought into its ambit maximum chunk of what is referred to as the supply side transactions which will happen into the ambit of taxation called as indirect taxation. This is significant for the businesses to continue their businesses and perform their businesses under the conditions of competition, because competition is the basis for the functioning of the market economy. On the other hand, there is one more very important fiscal measure that the government has taken up that this particular report mentions, the scrapping of dividend distribution tax. And this had been considered as a far-reaching reform even by the corporates, whereby there is an additional amount that is left over with the corporates in order to carry on their investment activity. There is second aspect that we have already mentioned, that is the financial side of reforms. We must remember that in 2013-2014, the Indian economy was going through what is referred to as near financial crisis, and post this near financial crisis, we were in a situation that banks were having highest percentage of non-performing assets that was unseen before. Hovering around 13% to 14% of these NPAs, the government of India alongside the central bank has introduced some of the reforms which have worked in favor of the financial sector and which has stabilized the financial sector according to this report. One such reform is the measure of 4Rs. This 4R as a measure that has been implemented by the government of India, where it would be recognizing these stressed assets, then it will be trying to resolve these particular stressed assets. Wherever it is unable to resolve these stressed assets, it will be sent to the consideration of the resolution process, and then if necessary, the government of India would go for what is referred to as restructuring. Apart from this particular process, the government of India also had another measure which is referred to as recapitalization, where some of the public sector banks were in necessity of getting recapitalized because they had significant chunk of contribution both in terms of the deposits and also in terms of loans. Apart from these measures, the government of India in this report mentions that there was one another financial sector reform that it considered very significant. That is with regard to the financial inclusion aspects. Government on the supply side has tried to include some measures which promote what is referred to as financial inclusion. On the other hand, this has led to this consequence of easing the life for a particular household, and apart from that, it is also has led to this consequence of ease of doing business for the businesses as they have promoted what is referred to as competition. Second aspect that it mentions is the public capital expenditure. Since 2014-2015 financial year, the report says the public capital expenditure has nearly doubled. Where it was earlier at 2.4% of the GDP, it has reached to the level of 4.5% of GDP, contributing to the highest level of capital expenditure from the government. And this has translated into some of the very significant key schemes in terms of infrastructure. One, the Bharatmala scheme, which is trying to ensure that there are this network of roads which are built, number one, and number two, you have what is called as Sagarmala project or scheme, wherein they were trying to promote growth through what is called as port infrastructure, and such infrastructural measures, as it says, was promoting the growth rate of India further high. Third, it mentions that the simplification of regulatory procedures have also contributed for the supply side factors to contribute towards growth. One such example that it was mentioning was this Real Estate Regulatory Act. This Real Estate Regulation Act has regulated the real estate projects in such a way that it has diminished the participation of black money in these real estates. On the other hand, it has created flexibility for the buyer of such real estate housing in terms of giving him the guarantee that within the timeline these projects are completed and the standards are also to be maintained. On the other hand, in order to promote such growth, there was one another policy that Government of India mentions in this particular report, that is the revisioning of the disinvestment policy. You might have seen that in the recent past, the Government of India has come up with some of the disinvestment measures. For example, disinvesting the LIC, wherein it is attempting to make sure that the private participation within Indian economy increases and the participation of the private sector along with the government in the developmental efforts is increasing. On the other hand, with respect to the public sector enterprises, it says it has come up with this new public sector enterprises policy, wherein the public sector enterprises on the one hand are being given more and more autonomy. On the other, the public sector enterprises have also been subjected to certain rationalization. On the basis of such rationalization, the profit-making public sector entities are given more push as part of this policy. On the other hand, it has also mentioned some of the reforms which are in support of the micro, small and medium enterprises, because of which, as this report says, they are able to cater to more number of jobs alongside more number of new entrants in this particular sector. And in order to do this, the Government of India has in fact revisioned the MSME definition itself, wherein earlier, which was on the basis of what is referred to as the capital base that the firm would have, but now on the other hand, you have what is called as profit as criteria, or size of the business that it is doing as the criteria. Some of these supply side factors, as it mentions, as you see in this particular picture, has given a push to, a fillip to the investment growth rate in the Indian economy. This investment growth rate straight away translates into what is referred to as capital formation. And this capital formation, as you know, is what significant for increasing the productivity in the economy apart from the production. Whenever there is improvement in the productivity levels, it means that the potential growth rate for the economy is going to be higher for a longer period of time, catering to the requirements of long-term growth for Indian economy. There are some other reforms that it mentions on the demand side. There are three such reforms that we can choose. One is financial inclusion, wherein through this so-called Jan Dhan accounts, it could cater to number of women to open the accounts, and it says more than 2 lakh crore of sum is lying in these particular accounts, and more than 10 crore population have had opened these particular accounts. Second, apart from opening the account, as you see in this financial inclusion aspect, this provides access to credit, this provides access to the social security benefits. These cater to the demand side requirements. On the other hand, it also mentions about the significant role that the digital public infrastructure has played. In this particular arena, it is trying to discuss about the digital payment ecosystem. Digital payment ecosystem. As you clearly know that the volume of transactions have skyrocketed because of this digital payment ecosystem which has been created, even though the value of the transaction has remained low. Given the volume of transactions, it is held that the banking sector is facing the stress because of so much of volume, even though the value of transaction is less. Yet, from the perspective of ensuring that there is a resource mobilization happening and resource utilization happening, this particular step is significant, and inherently this has also contributed to further financial inclusion and creating digital economy within Indian economy. Alongside, it mentions that the Government of India is also successful in improving the what is called as labor force participation rate. Even though there are certain concerns that the labor force participation rate is below par the global average of 50%, where in India it stands at around 42%. In spite of this particular low level of labor force participation rate in comparison with the global average, we must remember that this has increased from the levels of 33%. It is this that it mentions, and hence it is favorable in terms of the job creation within Indian economy. And it says that all this is leading to what is referred to as increase in the final consumption expenditure. As you clearly see that it is nearly 60% of the GDP size, and as you clearly see that for past few years, this private final consumption expenditure, which we refer to as demand-led growth, is consistently maintaining that level of nearly hovering around 60% levels in the Indian economy. And this report mentions that this was achievable in spite of certain global headwinds in terms of challenges. One such challenge we already have discussed earlier in one of our DNA, that there is this phase of end of hyper-globalization that globe has witnessed since 2002, 2014, 2015. Post-Brexit phenomena in 2016, this has been termed as the end of globalization phase. Accordingly, we see that there is decline in the globalization-related criteria, particularly the trade restrictions, migration-related restrictions, movement of capital-related restrictions are increasing day by day. Second, it also mentions about this advent of AI. It says that there are two adverse effects which are visible because of this advent of AI over any economy, including Indian economy. One is, in terms of service delivery, India had a comparative advantage, and this might come under threat because of this advent of AI. Number two, AI has also simplified many of the routine jobs, because of which there might be some threat to some level of employment or amount of employment in Indian economy. Number three, this mentions also the significant challenge of climate change, which is global in character. However, it has its own regional characteristics and local characteristics. Given this, there is uncertainty as to what sort of challenge that might emerge for the Indian economy. For example, there might be suddenly a flood in Chennai, which was probably unimagined in terms of its intensity. Such similar challenges might emerge. Such similar challenges might cause harm to Indian economy. In spite of these challenges, it says we are able to perform and keep the resilience of the Indian economy intact. Moving to the next article, we'll do this article that has been published in Indian Express. Taliban Minister discusses the regional ties with diplomats of 11 countries. What is the significance of this article? This is significant from GS paper 2 India and its neighborhood point of view, and it is also significant with regard to the larger picture of regional security. We'll delve into that article. Before that, let us look at this previous year question. Increasing cross-border terrorist attacks in India and growing interference in the internal affairs of several member states by Pakistan are not conducive for the future of SAARC. Explain with suitable examples. Asked in 2016, this tells us the importance of this region that can be translated into one particular question for mains. What is the context? As you see in this particular picture, Taliban Foreign Ministry has held a meeting recently with 11 particular countries. As you see here, it includes India also. What is the importance of this particular meeting? We know that the Afghanistan as a nation state has had a checkered history, and we know that in this checkered history, prior to the end of Cold War, it was the Cold War which was playing a role, which translated Afghanistan into a site of sectarian violence, a site of ethnic violence. But on the other hand, once the Cold War has ended, this became a hub of radicalization as alleged by the Western nations, and this has been now translated into a zone of war for a very prolonged period of time. In spite of the efforts for having a peaceful regime, peaceful democratic state in Afghanistan, we know that it has ultimately been taken over again by the Taliban. Post this scenario of American withdrawal of their troops from this part of the territory. Given this, we know that there were allegations of human rights violations as part of this region, number one. And number two, we also have read many articles with regard to how this political transformation has had impact on regional relations and security, because this part of the region, including few other nations is referred to as Heart of Asia. It is this we will be discussing. Kindly note that all of these 11 countries were visible here, and all these countries together used to be referred to as I said, Heart of Asia. It is this context in which we will be looking into this issue. What is this Heart of Asia? Look at this geographical location. This particular region, as we have seen in the previous map, makes up more than 40% of the entire landmass. Given this, we know that this is a geographic contiguity that you are seeing, and this geographic contiguity is important for their physical connectivity. Second, we also know that this physical connectivity has had its own historical significance. Keeping this particular region historically together, there were many exchanges which were happening, social, cultural, political and economic, throughout this region. Number 3, given these exchanges, this region has become a center of cultural diversity. And as we have already seen that this is a region of regional connectivity through this geographic contiguity, and we know that in the current context, this has its own security implications. And for us, Central Asia serves as one of the important regions as part of our India and its neighborhood policy, considering Central Asia as our extended neighborhood. Given all these factors, from the perspective of Indian context and from the perspective of even the global context in terms of peace and security, this Heart of Asia as a region is significant. On the other hand, we must keep in mind that there are certain challenges to this region of Heart of Asia. And we have to recall that this Heart of Asia as a region has been attributed with such nomenclature by a process called Istanbul process. This had been an initiative of both Afghanistan and Turkey. As you see in this particular news context, you see that Turkey is also part of these negotiations. India is also part of these negotiations. China, Russia, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, all these are part of these negotiations, indicating that this is a probable revival of this Heart of Asia Istanbul process, again, which has begun in 2011. This region had been hence considered as significant from multiple dimensions. This multidimensional characteristic of this particular conference is what making this particular issue important. And we have to also keep in mind that in order to revive our diplomatic relations earlier in 1991-1992, by the then government, we have had more than a 2-year prolonged process, as it has been written by the government in this particular document denoting the India-Afghanistan relations. Given the significance of this region and the difficult process that we have gone through in order to establish such relations, and we also know that from Indian context, we have had a very good humanitarian relations with Afghanistan, we must keep in mind that this revival of Heart of Asia and Istanbul process as a conference would be a welcome situation for India and for this entire region. We have to keep in mind that from the context of the security and instability challenge for this part of the region. Number 2, the Taliban insurgency, even though is being considered now as one state and as part of our India and its neighborhood policy, irrespective of the nature of political character of the government and the state of a particular nation state, we will be ready to have good relations and good terms with that particular nation state. Number 3, we know that there are certain economic hardships that Afghanistan itself is going through, because of which the concerns of security are emerging. And on the other hand, in order to have a greater supply chain linkage with other parts of the region for Indian context also, this part of the region and this revival of conference is significant. Moreover, within Afghanistan, there is a humanitarian crisis for which the support of India and all other international players is important and stakeholders is important, and there is an element of internal displacement and refugee crisis we have come up with within this part of the region, and hence this revival is significant. Moreover, this region is known for the drug trafficking, known for the weak infrastructure, and it also known for the challenges for the minorities and particularly the gender-related issues. Given all of these challenges, revival, as we have seen, is very, very significant. Moreover, if you look at the Indian context, this is important from the perspective that India is looking to establish her linkage with Chabahar port going through the Afghanistan, for which this particular peace process is very, very important. And the confidence building measures that we have to take as part of this process is important. And this has to be a multilateral process rather than a bilateral process. And number two, this is what establishes ultimately our linkage permanently and in a stable way with Central Asia. This connectivity is what going to push us to have more robust and stable connectivity this part of the region and stable supply chain, value chain linkages. What is the way ahead that is available? As you clearly see that this has to be an international cooperation based effort to revive peace within this part of the region, and this will lead to the economic development of that part of the region, even though at a slow pace. And number three, the humanitarian assistance that we are striving to provide to Afghanistan would be possible alongside such effort from other nation states. And number four, as we see that the education and health infrastructure has collapsed in Afghanistan, this would be a beginning point for reviving both of these. And ultimately, this would be possible as part of regional cooperation because Afghanistan had been either an observer or a member in number of such regional organizations. Instability in Afghanistan will create instability in the entire region. Hence, this is a welcome step. Moving to the next article, we will discuss this quota gambit as published in the Indian Express. Syllabus point of view, it is significant from Indian society, Indian polity, and also from the governance point of view, that is GS2. Look at this previous year question. Whether National Commission for Scheduled Castes can enforce the implementation of constitutional reservation for the scheduled castes in the religious minority institutions. Examine. Asked in 2018, this falls within the zone of same pattern of question that is possible even for this particular topic. What is the context? Recently, we clearly know that the continued protest was happening in Maharashtra, where even the mobilization of people belonging to a particular community referred to as Maratha community is also occurring, and this is leading to the escalation in the demand for Marathas reservation. And this reservation demand has recently been accepted by the Chief Minister of Maharashtra, Eknath Shinde. It is in this context we are discussing this issue. When we see that the reservation demand is being made, we have to keep in mind that there is a procedural requirement that has to be adhered to. First such procedural requirement is the measurement of backwardness has been done, and prior to that there was this committee called Narayan Committee which recommended 16% reservation to the Maratha community. This Maharashtra State Backward Class Commission has accumulated data with regard to this community, and it has declared that Marathas are socially, economically and educationally backward community, which means that the calculation of backwardness has been done and they have been declared as a backward community. This hence makes it possible to provide a kind of positive discrimination or affirmative action in favor of this particular community. Accordingly, the Maharashtra legislature has passed this Socially and Educationally Backward Class Act, granting this recommended 16% reservation by Narayan Committee to Marathas in educational institutions and also the government jobs. And we clearly see that this is falling within the zone of those fundamental rights of Article 14, Article 15 and Article 16, which in fact constitute in together what is referred to as right to equality. Now, what has been the judicial position on this particular reservation that has been granted? Bombay High Court has held that this reservation is constitutional. On the other hand, Supreme Court has struck down this particular reservation, saying that this particular reservation is unconstitutional. It was citing two important reasons. One reason is there is no situation and condition that can be seen in terms of going for reservations above this imposed limit of 50% or the ceiling of 50% through this Indira Sahni case by the Supreme Court. On the other hand, it also has cited this 102nd Constitutional Amendment Act. On the other hand, it has also cited this constitutional amendment which has been done to the Constitution through 102nd Constitutional Amendment Act. Through this particular constitutional amendment, we know that 338B as an article and 342A as an article have been inserted. This 338B as an article which has been inserted is mentioning the powers, functions and the structure of what is referred to as National Commission for Backward Classes. On the other hand, 342A is referring to the fact that from now on, the President of India is empowered to notify which is a backward community. On the basis of this provision, now, given the fact that the Marathas have been declared as socially, educationally and economically backward community by the State Backward Class Commission, this has been cited as unconstitutional measurement of backwardness, and this power is now lying with the office of President. On the basis of these two provisions, the Supreme Court has struck down this particular reservation that has been accorded to the Marathas. And also, as I said, there is no extreme condition as Supreme Court sees in this particular social, economic and educational condition of this particular community, and hence this has been struck down. Now, what are the socio-economic reasons that we can cite for this particular judgment? We clearly see that socio-economic differences do lie within the Maratha community. There are few members of the community who are truly backward and there are few other who are forward. And we have to keep in mind that much of this community is the land-owning community, as Supreme Court has clearly demarcated. On the other hand, we have to also see that over time, as it has been observed by the Narayan Rane Commission, there is decline of prosperity amongst the Marathas, and also there is a rural distress which is clearly seen in the Marathwada region, particularly where you see that there is stagnation and declining importance of agriculture. On the other hand, not only the unemployment factor in general, but specific to Maratha community, Narayan Rane Commission has cited that the unemployment levels are high within this particular community given their backwardness, and it is also contributing to their backwardness. On the other hand, we also see that given the high political consciousness related to caste and also the vote bank politics which have become a norm in the Indian political scene, this issue is arising again and again. As Supreme Court was citing, this protest itself in a way is taking away Article 14 and Article 21, where this right to equality and the right to live with dignity has been clearly being taken away by these protests. On the other hand, we also see that there are possible impacts in terms of law and order issues, and also there is possible impact particularly in terms of increasing demand from other communities too. And as we have already seen, this is considered as going against the Indira Sahni judgment of 1992. Now, we must also keep in mind what must be the role of the state in terms of recognizing the socially and economically backward class. As we have clearly seen that this has been accorded to the office of President now, given that structurally it has been established, the question of backwardness and the question of efficiency by providing reservations must be considered and balanced in order to come up with any affirmative action. Moving to the next article, we will discuss this issue of UNRWA funding. We know that some of the nations which fund this particular organization have suspended their funding, because of which it is in news. This particular article is important from GS paper 2 point of view, where the important international institutions may be asked in the examination, and then this is also important from the perspective of ethical conduct of the nations with regard to these humanitarian agencies. As you see in this particular previous year question, too little cash, too much politics leaves UNESCO fighting for life. Discuss the statement in the light of US withdrawal and its accusation of the cultural body as being anti-Israel bias. This has been asked in 2019, and you clearly see that the present issue is also on the similar lines, where it is fighting for its own life. What is the context? We know that Israel has accused this UNRWA, which is UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Near East, by saying that these UNRWA functionaries have worked in favor of Hamas when October 7 attack over the Israel territory has been committed by this particular allegedly terrorist group. As this allegation was made, many nations which were funding this UNRWA in order to provide humanitarian aid to the Palestinian refugees have been suspending their funding to this particular institution. Second, we also see that given this particular suspension, UN officials have urged these countries to reconsider their decision such that the funding is again back to this particular agency. Second, they were saying so by assuring that there will be strict action which will be taken against these particular staff members who have, according to Israeli allegations, participated in the attack over its territory. Now, we must see this particular issue from the perspective of what has happened over the other side of this particular coin or the issue, which is the judgment of the ICJ. Before doing that, let us look into what UNRWA is and its functioning is. This has been established in 1949, and we know that during the 1948 Arab-Israeli war, during this process of decolonization, many of the Palestinians were displaced from their own territories. Given this particular displacement has happened, they have become refugees in their own territory, and hence there was a requirement of some humanitarian aid agency which would work in favor of these so-called refugees, where this UNRWA has been set up in order to make sure that the refugees who are there in Gaza or the West Bank, or even from these regions of Lebanon, Syria and Jordan where these refugees are still present, be provided with the required humanitarian aid. Second, this humanitarian aid consists of the education services, health services, other such social services which are in necessity of these particular refugees. We must keep in mind that there are more than 6 million Palestinian refugees as UN Human Rights Watch declares within this particular region. Given these particular refugees, the aid provided by the UNRWA is most fundamental for their survival. And this is now beginning to see a crisis which is of the kind of survival crisis for these Palestinian refugees. And we have to keep in mind that rather than being funded by the budgetary allocations or by the UN agency, these are funded by the voluntary donations given by much of the nations across the world, particularly led by USA. Given this particular nature of funding, now UNRWA is fighting for her life. Now, as I said, we have to see this particular issue from the perspective of what ICJ ruling is. ICJ, on the one hand, has conducted an inquiry on the basis of a particular complaint, which is authoritative complaint. Given this particular petition, it has inquired into the matter and come up with certain judgment, saying that if the genocidal activities are happening by Israel in this part of the region against Palestinians, then such activities must stop. You clearly see that there is a kind of due process which has been followed. On the other hand, when this suspension has been made, there was just an allegation by Israel, number one, and number two, as the newspaper reports have shown, only 7 of those 30,000 functionaries who are working for this UNRWA organization, as it has quoted in its own website, have been allegedly involved in this particular attack according to Israel. And number two, given this particular distinction, you also see the response of the Western nations. On the one hand, ICJ, when it has come up with a pronouncement that this genocidal kind of activities, if any, are happening, must stop, even though it is short of what is referred to as stopping the entire conflict itself, because of the fact that Hamas is not party to this particular petition, the response has been tepid from the Western nations. But on the other hand, when it comes to the scenario of UNRWA and its funding, just by the allegation itself, even though the entire due process has not been yet followed, the funding has been unilaterally suspended by these nations. It is this contrast which has been discussed amongst the third world, which are showcasing this as a concern for the implementation of international law. Now, as you see that this is exacerbating the humanitarian crisis within this region of Gaza. Moving to the last article, we look at this article from the Hindu, which is titled as what is Humboldt's enigma and what does it mean for India. See, this article is significant from the biodiversity point of view, and this expression itself can be asked in the preliminary examination. What are the various aspects of this article? Before moving into that, we look at this prelims question. Consider the following statements. Biodiversity is normally greater in the lower latitudes as compared to the higher latitudes. Second, along the mountain gradients, biodiversity is normally greater in the lower altitudes as compared to the higher altitudes. This question is straight away being picked up from this concept of Humboldt's enigma. What is the context for this particular article? We must keep in mind that this individual named Alexander von Humboldt has attempted to establish a relationship between the temperature, altitude and humidity, which are critical ecological factors as we refer to in ecology, and the occurrence of patterns of species, that is what is referred to as biodiversity. And this pattern is assumed to be very significant for our understanding of the functioning of the ecosystem itself. Second, as he has thoroughly documented this, where he was trying to locate the factors for higher biodiversity and species diversity within this so-called Chimborazo mountain in Ecuador, he was trying to showcase certain evidences, and he was surprisingly throwing at us one particular challenge, which is what is referred to as enigma. Third, based on these findings alone, they established a link between the biodiversity and also this mountainous region, and this is what, as I said, is referred to as Humboldt's enigma. What this particular biodiversity that you see? Let us look at the biodiversity in tropics first. As you clearly know that tropics are the regions which are falling within the zone of equator to the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn, which are imaginary lines lying at this 23.5 degrees latitude. And we know that these tropics are the regions which receive highest amount of solar energy. And we clearly know that this happens because of the fact that the axis of the Earth is bent over the orbit with respect to Sun. Because of this, there is differentiation in terms of the radiation that is received by each and every region on the Earth. Given this particular fact, this has led to what is referred to as different types of habitats, and hence as these different types of habitats cater to different types of ecosystems, they have led to the emergence of different ecological niches or the characteristics that the organisms would have. And this has also led to different species related interactions in terms of food chain and food web, and also particularly the different types of species diversity. It is always assumed that it is the tropics which had this utmost species diversity because these are the regions which receive the highest amount of solar insolation. However, we have to look at what this Humboldt's enigma is. We clearly see that all biodiversity related areas which are rich in biodiversity are not confined to tropics. There are certain regions which are mountainous in their characteristics, where you find that they are highly diverse even outside the tropics. For example, if you take the case of vertebrates in mountainous region, the vertebrates and their species diversity and the species intensity is highest in these mountain regions. This is hard to understand, but even in Indian scenario, if you look at the Western Ghats and the Eastern Himalayas, you would observe that the biodiversity is rich in these parts of the region, and they are in fact referred to as biodiversity hotspots. Now, look at this particular picture. You clearly see that this region which are falling in the zone of mountainous region. For example, you look at this region of Andes. You also look at this region of Himalayas. As you see in this particular color gradient, this is referring to what is referred to as species richness, wherein you are saying that there are certain species whose presence is much higher in the mountainous region rather than the plain region or forest region. Second, if you observe the mountain endemics, that is the region where the species diversity is highest, you find that the mountain endemics have the highest percentage or proportion than the other tropic regions. And number 3, you would also find that given the smallest ranges that you consider within these mountainous region, you would observe that it is these regions of mountains, particularly the Andes, particularly the Himalayan mountain region. These are the ones which have such species diversity and their richness. What are the various reasons which are plausibly cited for this particular kind of diversity? One is, we know this phenomenon of mountain upliftment during the plate tectonic convergence, and this mountain upliftment, as it is seen, has created this new habitat and it has remained rich in terms of the species diversity. Second, this particular stability that you cite with regard to this mountainous region, which is largely not applicable to the regions which are falling in these tropics, which are not mountain regions, is another reason which is cited for such species diversity, because they could sustain many species for a prolonged period of time. And 3, there is this geological heterogeneity in this mountainous region, because of which also you find that different species are being catered to, given the fact that this geological intensity will have its relationship with the nature of the ecosystem. And this was able to create an ecological niche which is specially available for certain species, and this niche guarantees them the required structural characteristics within this ecosystem and the required functional characteristics within this ecosystem, and hence their continuation for millions of years has continued. This is what is referred to as the Humboldt's enigma, which is the rich biodiversity in the mountainous region with respect to certain species which is absent with regard to the such biodiversity within the tropical region, particularly the rainforests. Having completed the discussion over all the articles, we will now move to certain practice questions. Take these preliminary questions. The first question is, which of the following best explain the term ecological niche? The geographical location of a species within an ecosystem determining its distribution and abundance. The second choice is the physical characteristics of a species that enable it to survive and reproduce in a particular environment. The third statement is the total number of species present in an ecosystem indicating its overall biodiversity. And the fourth statement, the specific role and position occupied by a species within an ecosystem, including its interactions with other organisms and its utilization of resources. It is the fourth statement which has to be correct. It's about the place of that particular species within that ecosystem and what about the functions that it is going to offer to that particular ecosystem. This makes it part of what is called as ecological niche. Answer is D. Move to the second question. Which of the following government policies is most likely to contribute to inclusive growth in the Indian economy? 1. Implementing tax cuts exclusively for corporations to stimulate economic growth, which will not cater to that inclusive growth. Introducing subsidies for luxury goods to incentivize consumer spending among the affluent population, which also does not cater to inclusive growth. 3. Launching targeted programs to provide financial assistance and support to small and medium-sized enterprises. And fourth one is none of the above. It is the third option which has to be chosen because this caters to most number of jobs and employment creation in Indian economy. Answer is C. Move to the third question. In general, the net primary productivity of tropics is more when compared to the higher latitudes. The first statement, which is true. The second one is high net primary productivity aids the diverse ecological niches, thus it results in higher biodiversity, which is also true, and hence answer has to be both 1 and 2. The fourth one, consider the following statements regarding UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Near East. UNRWA is a body working under the UN Security Council to help people in the humanitarian crisis in Palestine, which is a false statement as we have seen. It was created in 2013, soon after Israel-Hamas conflict erupted, which is also a false statement because it has been created in 1948. Recently, it was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, which is also false statement. Hence, all these statements are incorrect. Fifth one, consider the following statements on other backward castes. The first statement is, Article 342A empowers the President to specify the socially and educationally backward communities in a state. Article 16 permits reservation of appointments or posts and in matters of promotion in favor of backward classes not adequately represented in the services under the state. Which one of the above statements is or correct? Answer has to be both are correct because both of the statements are correct. Moving to the mains practice question. Take this question. Afghanistan is often referred to as the heart of Asia. Examine the impact of instability of Afghanistan on India and the security of the larger region. The approach to this answer can be with an introduction wherein you are explaining various factors based on which we refer to Afghanistan as heart of Asia. And we know that being heart of Asia, we clearly see that in the current scenario, it is going through a crisis that is internal, and this is having an impact over the external agents such as various nation states. We have to establish this, keeping in view the entire region and how it is actually impacting the security and the regional connectivity of this entire region. Having established this, we may conclude by writing a way forward where how it is possible to achieve stability within Afghanistan and how this stability within Afghanistan, which is political, economic and social, may improve the regional stability of this entire region. Even from the Indian context, you can write that this is significant for India to improve upon its ties by utilizing this physical contiguity that Heart of Asia as a region establishes. Thank you one and all. If you like this initiative, please like, share or comment, and you can also attempt this mains question and write the answers and put these answers in the comment section, whereby our team will be going through and correcting them. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel Narayana IAS. Thank you one and all.